Welcome to a new episode of the Flow Experiments, the podcast where we explore together to connect to our own flow and live our life in our own rhythm, own rules, and own freedom. My name is Amazing Andy, and today we are unpacking the weights of worthlessness. That means that kind of feeling that you might experience in your life from not feeling good enough or feeling worthless. Today, we're gonna spot some lights on it, and I'm not gonna unwrap this present by myself. I'm joined by an amazing human being. He's a rapid transformation and mindset mentor, a deeply gifted holistic healer, worked with so many recognizable names in Hollywood, world champions in sports, athletes, and high-performing executive. Has a fresh approach to transforming and is a powerhouse of non-nonsense healing. A wise, funny, down-to-earth Scot with a wizard's touch. Welcome, Steve Harvey.
Hi, Andy. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for being here. I want to start off with a little story that I experienced like 2 or 3 weeks before when working with myself, and I realized I still have a belief of feeling not good enough or sometimes worthless. You had a good title afterwards, from worthless to priceless. And we talked about it, and you wrote me a story about a client you had who was going from worthless to priceless. And I was like, oh shit, this is like the story from my last 2 weeks. We need to talk about it, and I want to do a podcast. So happy that you joined me. You worked with you worked with a lot of people from all ends of the spectrum. How do they think about themselves in terms of how worthy they are?
It's interesting. I've lived and worked in 14 countries around the world, and from people from all walks of life, as you say, from A-list celebrities and rock stars to world champion athletes to stay-at-home mums. And the common theme or issue, if you like, that I hear from every culture, every language, is that I'm not enough. And so I started to explore that. Where does it come from? And so I think when I'm sitting with someone, the first thing I have to remember to do and sit quietly and say to myself is, remember, Steve, you're not here to fix anyone, but to invite out who they really are. Because who they really are is complete, whole, and perfect until the story comes along that says otherwise. And so again, it comes back to that same question of who would I be without my story? And most people are attempting to fix their lives from the outside in. You see, they're struggling to change their behavior, and most of the self-help books and programs that I've come across, they're all talking about change the action and get a different outcome. But the truth is, the actions they're not the starting point. They're downstream. It's almost like, I like to use this analogy. Thoughts create a disturbance in the body's energy system, which then determines how we feel. Our feelings then determine the actions we take or don't take, which ultimately determines the results that we get or don't get. So way before we address the actions, we've got to look at what's really the underlying root cause. And again, it's the thinking. And the thing is, we've never been taught how to investigate our thinking. So that left one option. We believed it. And then we go to war, literally and metaphorically, to try and defend our thinking. And we don't even know if what we're believing is true. An example we can have when we're driving along the road and someone in front of us is on their mobile phone. I think you call it a handy in Europe.
It is.
And so how do we react when we see them? Because most of the time when they're on their phone, they're driving slow and erratic. They're moving back and forth along the lanes. How do we react when we believe they shouldn't be on their phone and they are? No. So we allow that object referral to then get to us. And we speed up to overtake them and wave a nice friendly gesture to them. Was telling them they're the one, you know, sort of thing. But who would we be without that thought that they shouldn't be on their phone? For all we know, it could be a brain surgeon talking an intern through a surgery. And he's en route to the operating theatre. So can we absolutely know without a doubt that he shouldn't be on his phone? And then how do we react? As I say, we go to war to defend that belief. And who would we be without that thought? We'd be free. But as I said, we've never been taught to investigate our thinking, so that left one option. We believed it. And so it's not about changing the behavior, the actions. It's about really, really starting with the beliefs and the thinking. And when we talk about our experience of feeling worthless, as I say, you know, I've traveled the world now, and that's that invisible weight of not enoughness that I see again and again. And at first, you know, it used to surprise me because, you know, I may have been working with an A-list celebrity or a billionaire. And I'm thinking, this doesn't fit my picture here. How can you feel worthless? But, you know, you've heard people say this, you're only as good as your last shot. You're only as good as your last hit record. You're only as good as your last movie. You see? Yeah. Then, boom, the past is gone. And so what's causing that? You see, in Ayurveda, which I have a background in, there's a concept known as samprapti, which is the 6 stages of the dis-ease process. And by the time the signs and symptoms show up, the feelings of worthlessness, anxiety, frustration, depression, migraine, headaches, you name it, no matter what it is, that's already at the 5th stage. So what's before it? You see? It's like, imagine you come home at night and you discover there's a puddle on the floor in your living room. That's not the problem. It's the symptom of a problem, but it's not the problem. And so we think just by mopping the wet floor, it's going to resolve the issue. And so this is what people do when I think when they address change the action, you get a different outcome. You know, so you then sort of reverse engineer it back and you look at, okay, you start to see that the faucet, the washer on the faucet was worn out. And so it was dripping. And then the sink was with the plug in it, so it starts to accumulate there and overflow. And then it flows along the floorboard. And that little dip in the floorboard is where it puddles. And we come home and we think, oh, that's the problem. But the real problem was the washer that was worn out. So this is when I'm sitting with people, I'm understanding, you know, what they're telling me. And a question I love to ask them after they've, you know, they've been talking for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then I just look at them and I say, so what's the problem? It's like a pattern interrupt, you know, they go, but I've just been telling you for 20 minutes. No, that's not the problem. You're describing the symptoms, you see? And so if we really want to get to what's what's beneath, the worthlessness, we've really got to go back and look at our thinking, and it's almost as if we're, as I say, we've been programmed since childhood and we're living out a script, but it was never our script to begin with.
So we just want it from someone else.
Exactly. You're never born feeling worthless. Somewhere along the line, we interpreted feedback, and now we gave it a meaning, because the two invisible forces that drive all behavior are the meaning that we give things and the emotion we attach to that meaning. So it's a learned response. And there's two ways of experiencing the self. There's object referral, where your sense of worth is dependent on external validation. How people see you, what you've achieved, how much money you've got in your bank account, what kind of car you drive. That's why I spend quite a lot of time working back and forth with clients in Monaco. And I love to sit and have a coffee just at the cafe there beside the big casino. And people watch, and just watching how people react, when you see this bling driving on one after another, Ferraris, Lambos, Rolls Royce, you name it, G-Wagons. And I find it interesting to watch people's reactions, the story that they tell themselves. And also, they're putting these people on a pedestal.
So you don't watch the cars, you watch the people who watch the cars.
Exactly. But what happens is we tend to put these people on a pedestal. We think they've got something I don't have. You see? And so what do we do then? We minimize ourselves relative to them.
Okay. So we compare ourselves.
Yeah, the comparaholism, as I like to call it. But then we may walk around the corner and we may run into some homeless person. And what do we do then? We minimize them relative to us. And we tell ourselves, they've got something I don't have. But they're both an illusion. Because every human being has got every human trait, you see. So rather than putting people on a pedestal or putting them in the pit, the secret is to put them in our heart with love and gratitude for who they are. Likewise, when we compare ourselves to other people and we think they've got something I don't have, we put ourselves in the pit. That pit of worthlessness, of not enoughness. And so when we're living in object referral, it's a setup, But when we come from self-referred, where your value is intrinsic, it's unshakable and it's non-negotiable, then it doesn't matter what someone says or does, what they think about you. It's just their story. And they could be right. I like to say there's nothing that someone could tell me I haven't already told myself 1,000,000 times. They may think I'm an a-hole, right? Yeah, I do too, sometimes. They may think I don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Yeah, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Then they may think I'm this amazing guy, not as amazing as Amazing Andy, but this amazing guy. And I think, yeah, I've thought that sometimes, you see. So there's nothing that anyone could tell me that I haven't already told myself, you see. So when we live in object referral, we become slaves to the world's approval. I need your love, I need your appreciation, I need your approval. And as I say, it's a recipe for disaster and for feeling worthless. But when we shift into self-referral, we realize that our worth is not something to earn. It's something to reclaim. You know, I think we spend so much of our life trying to prove our worth. And we fail to realize that it's our being that's worthy, not our doing. Our doing will never be enough, but our being is always enough, more than enough. See?
And is already yet enough.
Sorry?
And is already yet enough. So we don't have to
It's
get
already.
something.
Otherwise, you're basically saying to God, to the universe, to the creative energy, hey, you screwed up here. You did a good job with her. Not bad with him. But what were you thinking when you came to me? You see?
Yeah.
And so, and it's interesting, you know, as our mutual friend Wolfgang likes to say, the reason that we feel worthless or depressed is because we're not living our true self. You see? And so I think all sickness, all dis-ease is really homesickness. And therefore the real journey, the one that's rarely spoken about in that, you know, change your actions model of self-help, is the journey back to wholeness, the journey back to your true self. And it's a return to the reality that you were never broken in the first place. But just brilliantly adaptive in environments that you didn't understand your value. And that's why I like to say, everybody loves me, they just don't know it yet. See? But, you know, all kidding aside, when you're living your true self, you discover that you already have what you want when you are what you want. Again, as Wolfgang says, is be, do, have. Put yourself into the frequency of already being what it is you want. But so many people are conditioned to putting their happiness, their contentment on hold. When I achieve that, then and only then can I love myself, can I feel worthy. You see? So I think it's really about stopping seeking that need for approval from outside and to discover that who you are is already complete, whole, and perfect. And that's why I say it's really important when I'm sitting with someone that I don't jump into that trap of thinking, oh, I'm the big shot, I'm going to fix them, and they need fixed. Because if I see people as needing fixed, then I'm part of the problem.
Mm.
My job is to hold the space for them to see their completeness. And the only way you can really find that is by going within. As I like to say, it's an inside job, but only 100% of the time.
So you're basically saying we always have been complete, we all have been worthy, we always have been priceless.
Always.
We just believe the story from whoever or whatever or what event or history, and we're just telling ourselves that story again and again, and again.
Yeah.
That was one thing when I realized that by myself. I saw like a big spider web, like with many different experiences and like beliefs and stuff, but it was all just holding on one thread.
Yeah.
And then you start questioning, okay, is that one thread really true?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And again, as I said, it's the meaning we give things and the emotion we attach to the meaning. I like to use the analogy of looking up at the night sky and seeing all the stars. And each star has got a different meaning. And so if someone doesn't return our phone call, for example, we pick a star out of the sky and we say, oh, that means there's something wrong with me. And then we go to war to defend that, you see? Where it could be, wait a minute, what if I picked a difference? Oh, that means the phone was stolen by a pickpocket in Rome. You see, we have no idea, but we only picked, as you said, that one thread. We picked that one star. And so who would we be without that story? As you said, is it true? And it's such a powerful question. And when we really stop and go within, get still, get real quiet, and go within and sit with that question, can I absolutely know without a doubt that what I'm believing or the meaning I'm giving to something is true? And so it's like asking yourself, where did this come from? Where did I learn to feel small? Where did I learn that my being wasn't enough? And it could be with well-meaning parents that said something to us, but as a child, we didn't have, the maturity to really fully understand what they were saying. And then, that becomes the soundtrack of our life. We keep playing that same story again and again. And then we go and look for proof.
And we find it.
Yeah. And then see, I was right. I am useless. I am worthless. Nobody loves me. They're running the same program again and again and again. And unfortunately, there's so many people that have been put down by society. And it's very difficult to climb back up, But it really involves, going within. And that's why I say transformation doesn't begin with action. It really begins with awareness, by questioning our thinking and asking ourselves if what we're believing is really true. And you might be surprised what you discover.
So what would you suggest someone listening to this and like, oh, okay, interesting what you're talking about. Where should they start?
I think by questioning their thinking. One of the greatest pieces of work that I've come across, and I use it daily, both for myself and when I'm working with clients, is the work of Byron Katie. And what we're talking here, the four questions in a turnaround, is no matter what it is that's troubling you, write it down, ask 4 questions and turn it around. And so an example could be, my teenage son should keep his room tidy. Is that true? Yes. So the first question is usually the answer is yes. Second question is, can you absolutely know without a doubt what someone else should and shouldn't do? No, we can't know anything without a doubt, right? So how does it make you feel when you believe your teenage son should keep his room tidy and according to you, it's a mess? I get frustrated. Okay, how do you speak to him? I start to nag. What else? I threaten him that I'll take away his mobile phone. I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do that. Okay, and how's that working for you so far? As Dr. Phil likes to say, right? How's that working for you so far? So who would you be without the thought that he should keep his room tidy? Free, peaceful. Okay, so can you give me one reason that's not stressing you out to keep that thought, which is arguing with reality, right? No. So can you drop it and turn it around 180 degrees and find where the exact opposite is truer? He should keep his room tidy becomes he should not keep his room tidy becomes, I should keep my room tidy. And then let's go deeper again. I should keep my thinking tidy.
Right.
See? So then you start to see your teenage son in a whole different light. You start to realize he's your guru. He saved you a trip to India. Thank you, Guruji. Now clean your room. So it's very liberating. So that's fundamental of, you know, the work I do with people. But another part of the work I do is, what I mentioned earlier on was, you know, we put people on a pedestal or we put them in the pit. We think, so we're looking for a one-sided event or a one-sided life in a two-sided universe. See? And by that, I mean, we think people should be nice and kind and supportive and be there for us and be loyal and whatever. But what's the reality? The reality is that every single person that you ever have a relationship with will be nice and mean, supportive and challenging, attractive and repulsive, there for you, stabbing you in the back. But when we look for a one-sided event or a one-sided person in a two-sided universe, then we get pain. So ultimately, both approaches are really looking at how can we learn to love what is, no matter what is. How can we find the gift in each situation? How can we find the benefit? And I was just working with with someone the other day, and they were a former Canadian football Grey Cup champion, an elderly gentleman now who's dealing with a neuropathy in his feet. And so I was asking him what was the gift. He said there was no bloody benefit. You know? But afterwards, we took him through the process and he was able to be at peace with it, right? Because he found benefits where before he only saw drawbacks. So no matter what our situation is in life, if we flip it around and say, what's the benefit that this is occurring? But then also ask, what would be the drawback if it was the way I think it should be? See? Because that's the other setup. Oh, when it was like, if it ends up being like this, then I'll feel good. Yeah, but what would be the drawback? People think, oh, if I won the lotto, it'd be fantastic. Yeah, but what would be the drawback? I'd love to be a famous musician. Yeah, but what would be the drawback? You see? So when we understand that where we are is exactly where we're supposed to be, and it's perfect, then we stop seeking. But it's the seeking, thinking when I get there, then I'll feel good.
No.
I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah?
Greatly.
Okay.
So we living basically in this two-pole universe, and sometimes we watch at one side and sometimes we watch at the other side, and we want the one side without the other side and vice versa. But we have all of it, and we have to basically love all of it.
Yeah.
How do
And that
we?
starts with ourselves. You see? That starts with ourselves. You know, I've discussed this before with a filmmaker. Never went anywhere, but I was just throwing some ideas around. And I said, you know, I would love to have a little short documentary or short film where it would film women from, say, the ages of, 14, 15, all the way up to, the 60s, 70s. And all you would see would be the face of the woman looking at herself in the mirror first thing in the morning with no makeup. And she was to speak out loud her thoughts about herself. She's standing naked, looking at herself in the mirror, but you would only see her head, right?
Yeah.
What would be the story that these women from different age groups, from different backgrounds, different cultures, different status financially, what would their stories be? You just spent time traveling in Asia, right? What do you think the women in Asia that maybe are trying to live on $2 a day, what do you think their story is when they look at themselves in the mirror without makeup on? Versus what do you think? Sounds bad, like I'm coming down on these, wealthy people in Monaco, but it's just that it's in full display or Dubai or whatever, right? How would a woman from one of those places, the uber rich, how would they talk to themselves?
Probably almost the same way, but in different language.
I don't know, because my observation has been that a lot of the women in the third world countries who've never had the access to, social media and marketers, Seth Godin says all marketers are liars, right? But they've never been programmed on being told, this is who you are, but this is who you should be. This is what you should look like. You see, they don't have that. Whereas in the West and in affluent society, this is the programming. Oh, you're not enough unless you've got the Benz, you've got the Ferrari, you've got the Lamborghini, you've had, the facelift, the Botox, the Restylane injections, wearing Gucci or whatever it is. Whereas the woman in Cambodia or in India and the rural villages, they're too busy trying to find some food.
Yeah, to survive.
Yeah. I remember years ago, when I had my clinic in town, I had an Ayurvedic doctor came. He was on a sabbatical to visit his daughter and her husband, but quickly realized he was being used as a babysitter. So he was pleading with me to come and pick him up every morning and bring him to my clinic. And I remember he was working with a lady, and he prescribed some herbs and some different gemstones to put on her fingers with mantra. And different day of the week she would wear the gemstone. And when he gave her the invoice, her comment was, "Oh my God, this is so expensive." And because she had been to India a couple of times, she was now an authority on India. And she said, "I've been to India and I know how much they charge." And he said, actually, when I'm in India, I charge 3 times what I'm charging you. So she quickly shot back to him, "Oh, so you only work with the rich?" To that, and then he replied, "Precisely. It's only the rich who have got these problems." He said, "Poor people are too busy being poor. They get up, okay, we've got to find some food for the day. They go out, they do whatever it takes. Maybe they do some manual labor, whatever. They get some rice." He said they sit down as a family and they eat together and they actually talk to one another. I said, what a concept. And so he said, so yes, it's only the affluent societies that have these problems. And how many times have you gone out for dinner and you see a family come in and every one of them are on their mobile phone? Nobody's talking to one another, So you start to look at that and you think, I remember going from Cambodia to St. Moritz, just at lockdown, to work with a very affluent family. So I left Cambodia, where 46% of the population survive on less than $2 a day, to now going with a multi-billionaire and his family. And I found that although the Cambodians had nothing, they were filthy rich. And this billionaire who had everything, I found the family were living in poverty. And it was such an eye-opener to see. So again, what is the story that we tell ourselves? What is it we believe that is out there that's going to make us happy? It's never about out there.
It's always the inside job.
Always an inside job, but only 100% of the time.
That's so good. Thank you so much for your wisdom, Steve, and for your pearls of knowledge. And I hope everyone who's watching this that did realize it's an inside job and only 100% of the time. So it's on you.
Question the thinking, but it's also to finally realize that you're not worthless. You never were. You're priceless. And it's nothing to do with what you do, but because of who you are. So your being is worthy. And once you remember that, we say in Scotland, life's a doddle. The outcomes will just take care of themselves. So live your true self. Get in touch with your true self. And, Byron Katie said, if I had one prayer, that would be, God, please stop me from seeking love, appreciation, and approval, and find it instead. Go within. See?
That's so beautiful. Finished word. We're going to close off. You find Steve Harvey at steveharveysolutions.com. I'm going to link your website.
Thank you.
It has been a pleasure talking to you.
As always, yes. I can't believe an hour went so fast.
Me too, but good times take forever. So stay tuned for the next one, and you're priceless.